Welcome back to our next session in the Small Business Family Edition series. So excited to have you guys back. And today we're going to talk about something very exciting with this, and that's, I guess, the succession planning, because I think all small business owners are just so focused on grinding and building that they forget about one day they're not going to be the builder. They're not going to be the owner, and they're not going to be the grinder anymore. And either like they've made the choice or the choice was made for them. Mm-hmm. And so, Bill, I would love today, and Lisa in this, talking about the succession, like your plan to have a healthy succession. And so I'd love to talk about that. Allie, if you want to set us up at all, like where is the business today after your parents exited?
Well, I was actually just going to say and add on to what you already said.
Please do.
This is the Wake Coaching Podcast, right? And everybody always kind of asks, like, where does Wake come from?
It's good.
And for us, it's all about legacy. Mm-hmm. What is the Wake that you leave behind you? You're going to leave behind a Wake.
That's great.
It's going to be good or bad. So what kind of Wake are you going to leave?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's not an option of yes or no.
Yeah.
And so we're so passionate about being intentional about your legacy, designing the legacy that you do leave. And I think we're passionate about it too because we've seen it done well. Mm-hmm. But so many people that we've met, like there's that resistance to the idea of life beyond them leading their business or their business living beyond them, you know, and it's almost not wanting to admit that there's anything more, not wanting to really look at what's next. And so we love to talk to people about being legacy-minded and leading legacy-minded. And you've heard that phrase, like starting with the end in mind, but that's just so important. So there's no one better to learn about that than from my mom and dad. So my sister and I worked for the family business I was there for over 16 years. Yeah. And I don't even remember how far in it was that you started talking about succession. I feel like that was probably about 6 years in that I had been there, because you started succession planning like 10 years prior to when you actually wanted to retire.
Easy, yeah.
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 And I feel like there's a lot of people that would be like, whoa, Bill, settle down. Like, why are you already...
There were some, yeah.
Right. So talk through what was the thought process there.
I was actually quite impacted by Stephen Covey's book. And my biggest takeaway from the 7 Habits was begin with the end in mind. That really impacted my life. That not only in business, but in all my life, to think about, he sets up the book thinking or imagining what would your funeral look like and what would people say about you when they eulogize you. And you're the one who really can write that script by how you live your life. And so I just bought into that, and that was my biggest takeaway from that book, and it did indeed impact my life. And so I thought about that in business, and so we'll stay focused on legacy. There are a lot of other areas of business that this impacted for me, but as it relates to legacy, yes, I thought that I needed to be thinking about my exit strategy very, very early on. So I learned that there were opportunities to go to different presentations that were happening around the Twin Cities, and it seemed like I would go to one and I registered for something, and I would get another invitation a couple months later, and before you know it, I'd gone to 5 or 6 or 7 of them and read books on it, and I heard things that just shocked me, stunned me, stories about men and women who worked all their lives to build a business, and all of a sudden they got a pain, and they went to the doctor, and they're in stage 4 cancer of some sort, and they've got 6 months, and that business revolved around that individual. They gave no thought about the end in mind. And now this man's worried about his family and what he's going to leave it, and his business is only worth nickels on the dollar because he's going to be gone. And he's the whole value in that business.
Yeah.
I mean, these were stories I heard told over and over in these types of presentations, emphasizing the importance of getting going on your exit strategy now, no matter where you're at. So a little fast forward on this was when I retired, I had met with key individuals for the 1 year before retiring. They had special meetings with them leading up to my retirement date. And one thing I told the two top people, my daughter Angelica, who was going to succeed me as CEO, and Ryan, who is going to become the president, and I said, the day that you take over, you need to get working on your exit strategy. Now, why have a good exit strategy? Well, first of all, it's going to provide for a better value for the organization itself and what that represents to you. What if you literally don't live to see that day? What if you're run over by a bus? I have a friend who the owner of his company literally got hit by a bus.
Literally.
He was riding a bicycle with his wife. He literally got hit by a bus. He did not have his plans and his paperwork done.
Wow.
And it was a really bad catastrophe with his business because he didn't work with the end in mind. And so those things do happen. So I got with lawyers, I got everything papered properly, I trained my people, and then at the end I trained them to get going on their exit strategy.
So, and when you talk about that, like Angelica and Ryan, and they took over, and you said, hey, the day you take over is the day you should start planning your exit strategy.
Yeah.
You told them that, and they're how old when they took over, just context-wise?
Angelica would have been about 37-ish, and Ryan, I think, is the same age or so, just within a year or so.
So I don't think anyone in their late 30s are thinking about retirement except for I need to save enough for it. They're,
Right.
and most are like, I have to grind, I have to build, I have to go, I have to make it happen. But what you're saying is rather than, you're going to have to grind, you're going to have to work, you have to do all those things, but do it with the end in mind. Like be intentional about it. Like if you're going to, don't just default your way to the end, like design your way to the end.
Yes.
Right.
So
Yes.
beyond,
And they are.
you know,
They're doing it.
maybe
That's
the
awesome.
more practical, like paperwork, working with lawyers, things like
Right.
that. What were some of the principles, or like how did being legacy minded really change your decision making?
Well, I think to build a structure in terms of like a real organization, like we talked about in the last couple of episodes, that you've got the processes, the procedures, you've got an accountability chart. These things are very important because you take one player out because of a tragedy or they decide to quit, whatever the case may be. Boy, it's not rocket science to replace that person. It makes life a lot easier. So there's all that structure that we talked about earlier. So we put that in place and the right people. And I had to make sacrifices early on. When my compatriots other entrepreneurs out there that I fellowshipped with in executive peer groups, when they're taking $100,000 and $200,000 bonuses, I was not taking any bonuses. I was sinking the money into quality people that could succeed me. Quality people could fill out a real strong team. So that if I go away, this thing's just going to keep rolling on.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I'm thinking about me and I'm thinking about my wife and my family, that they would get something in exchange for all the hard work I put into this company. But I'm also thinking about all those people who've helped me.
Yeah.
If I do a bad job, the exit strategy and providing a legacy, when I left there were 180 employees. Now if you think about that, maybe lots of them have spouses, some have kids. You might be talking about 500 mouths that we're feeding here. If I have something that's so poorly put together that literally sinks the company, my company was going to sink when my sister died. There's no doubt about it. And if something happened to me, to think that 180 employees, maybe roughly 500 people, all of a sudden they don't know where they're going to get their next meal. They're out looking for a job because their company went bankrupt. So I wanted plenty of money in the bank. I wanted us to have reasonable debt ratios to our equities. I wanted us to have strong leadership. I wanted that leadership to own the big relationships in the community. I mean, most of our big relationships, other than the banking ones, I didn't even know the people. It was my executives who knew them. I mostly managed the banking relationships, which I brought Angelica into for the last few years before I retired.
You really were like shrinking your role in a big way. You were very much like in the visionary role, but like you were in a mentorship and development
Yes.
role. Like that was a majority of the time that you were putting in.
Yeah.
And it was just all about like imparting the wisdom and the knowledge and training up everyone around you.
Yeah, it's a football analogy, but it's sort of like being a head coach. How often do you see the head coach run the ball?
Right.
I mean, he doesn't even get on the field, right? He wouldn't dare.
Yeah.
He'd get crushed.
Yeah.
And but it's like, yeah, you raise up a team so they can run the ball. And so, yes, that's right. I was more of that advisory capacity. You need to bring people along, bring people into those relationships that are the key relationships. You want to think in terms of, and I use the expression many times, what if I got hit by a bus? I want this company to not miss a beat.
Right.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, that was your mindset. And so really that became the mindset for everyone within the
Yes.
organization, within
Yes.
any role,
Yes.
which is incredibly healthy.
Yes.
No
Right.
organization's success should hinge upon one person.
Right.
Right.
And we had that experience. My husband worked with us and passed away suddenly. And we felt the pain, but it was like
We carried on.
we carried on, and he had documented everything, and he had developed his, right-hand man, and it luckily was not detrimental to our organization and the clients that we served
So-
because you've
Yes.
embedded that mindset in all of us.
Yes, and I remember her husband's name was Ty, and I remember it was literally only months before Ty had died that I met with my team, and I said, I've been preparing for me getting hit by a bus, but what about you guys? You're managing big parts of this operation. And Ty was probably the least organized of all of them. And
He got
He was
organized.
we love
He
Ty
got
dearly.
organized.
But
Yeah.
and he was the least organized, and we had roughly 13 large properties that he was managing, the maintenance, and there's a lot to it. It's a big deal, and had several guys working under him. And Ty took it seriously though, and he worked really hard for several months to get things in writing, get them stored on the computer, and have his spreadsheets and everything. And yes, he unfortunately, we were up at our cabin just doing some cleanup on the yard in the spring, and Ty just had a heart event and died suddenly, and he was never brought back from that point.
Right.
And it's very upsetting and hit our company hard, but organizationally, Jake, his second in command, was able to just step right in there, open up the files, and boom, everything's there. And it was a pretty seamless transition.
You know what's interesting about even this? Sometimes, you're sharing stories like your sister passed away, which forced you into the role. And if you hadn't stepped in, we wouldn't be talking about
Probably not.
SLS right now,
No.
right? It would be gone, right? And then here's another situation where you're like, hey, I'm going to start with the end in mind. I'm going to build it this way. This is what I'm going to do. You're preparing as if you were to get hit by a bus, and then you have another untimely death in the family and family business. But yet, because you had processes and procedures in place, you continued to move forward because you'd all planned that way.
You know what? I observed in all of that if you're properly planning for succession, the person behind you ends up doing a better job than you did.
True.
Because they take it to the next level. They've seen what you do, and they're following in your footsteps, but now they've got new ideas and better ways of doing things. And so it's a good thing. It's new life.
Yeah, we talk a lot about that just kind of personally, right? Like the necessity of seasons.
Yeah.
And how there's really truly a season for everything, and that's a healthy
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
Right.
Like, and you
Yeah.
see those founders who hang on way
Too
too
long.
long.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, please.
Please go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need new blood.
Yes.
We need new
Right.
life.
And
right?
everyone knows
Yeah.
it,
Right.
except it seems like but them.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
So
that's
here-
a good point.
Here's one question that comes to mind, because we're talking about things that honestly it can seem a bit like almost insensitive. Like, no, don't talk about when you're going to be done, Bill. Let's not talk about that. Keep casting vision. Keep leading us. And you're like, no, I'm going to be done one day.
Yep.
And like some people
Yeah.
are like, no, don't say that. Like, you're our leader. You know, there could be that component, or the flip side, like, why would you talk about an untimely death? Like, you're not going to get hit by a bus. And I mean, conversations like that can, for some people, seem unsettling. Like, Bill's not going to be our boss anymore. Bill's going to get hit by a bus. Someone might die. What? Like, that can seem a bit unsettling. But like
Right.
on the flip side, I mean, how did that, like what you were saying, Lisa, you actually saw people step up more. Like, what was the feeling in the company when they're like, oh, Bill's not going to be here forever?
They were not they didn't miss a beat. It really makes the way for the next person to step in their shoes much better, because people are waiting and excited to see who it will be, rather than we have a new leader. So I think it's a disservice to the people carrying on in your absence if you don't prepare them.
I remember the management meeting that we had when you announced it. And you announced it, what, like 2 years prior?
Yes.
I mean, this wasn't 2 months before it's going to happen, but it's just setting the stage for everyone, right?
Right.
And like preparing their hearts, and also inviting them in to really like, hey, take ownership,
Yes.
right? That's part of what you said. And like, there's opportunity here. Be a part of it. Like,
Yes.
this isn't just my company. You guys are all
Absolutely.
able to own. And so I remember everyone being sad, but it was also like, but it's happening in 2 years.
Right.
So I think it was really beautiful, because it was like, by the time any emotion, like, Bill's still here though,
Right.
and
Right.
we just got to process through that and really
Right.
not have this kind of gut-wrenching goodbye sort of situation.
So by the end of the 2 years, it's like, all right,
we're
go
ready.
already.
We're good.
Please
Okay,
leave.
you've prepared us. We know what we're doing.
All right, go. Go to Florida, Arizona.
So even that, like, it's kind of like almost reverse. Like, you think about your teenager, you push them out of the nest, like, ready to
Right.
go.
Yep,
Now
yep.
it's the flip side. They're pushing you out, like, hey,
Yes.
Bill, we're good. Like, pushing
Got
you out, like,
this.
into the empty nest or into that phase of life. So now you're empty nesters. You've sold the business. You've retired.
Right.
Like, I'm sure you're doing nothing with your time now,
Oh,
right?
we just
Because-
started new businesses. Right.
Okay, so it's interesting, because a lot of people that we talk to, because when we're coaching, we're talking to them about the succession plan, and we always say without a clear strategy, you make emotional decisions, right? And so you guys had this clear strategy. There was
Yeah.
emotion involved, but yet there was an end date. The end date came, and now you guys are retired,
Yes.
right? So what are you doing now? Now that the succession has happened, you're retired, what does life look like now?
Can I just take issue with the retired word?
It's
Say
right.
it. Yes.
It's a
not
myth, at
semantics.
least when it comes to these two.
Yeah.
I mean,
We're not retired.
Right. I think that's actually a great point.
Right.
Because it used to be like when, back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, when it was in a factory or manual labor, there was this idea that, my dad was a bricklayer and he laid bricks till he was 65. It's kind of crazy. And he did that intentionally. He could have, retired at 62, but wanted to stay longer to have a higher pension. But it was like when he retired, he didn't work. He stopped working.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Because he
like
he
life
worked.
is all about comfort now instead of, right?
Yes.
I mean,
Instead
that's
of
kind
purpose.
Yes, that's kind of what I
100%.
think of, at least when you say retirement,
Right.
and I'm like, that's not a thing for them.
Yeah. I think I'd like to back up a little bit
Yeah.
and go back to my education in that area of exit strategies, one thing that all the different coaches emphasized was having a plan for yourself after you've exited. That you just don't go off into oblivion and, watch Oprah all day or whatever. But watch TV all day or whatever. I'm going to fish every day, which that's fine if somebody wants to do that. But they emphasize having a plan, working on your physical fitness, working on your spiritual and mental fitness, all these kind of things. And what are you going to do? What are you going to do with your time? And I just had a plan. I don't want to go into the details of it, but I knew somehow inside of me that I wasn't done. Like, I just don't feel finished. I feel like there's more inside of me to give out. And I want to give until I'm gone. I feel like I have some gifts of leadership, of development, and I've always wanted to be in a different kind of business. And so, yes, we had the opportunity to get involved in a Discover Strength, which is a strength training studio where there's one-on-one strength training, which I've been going there for 11 years myself, and they decided to franchise a few years ago. So we had the opportunity to invest in that, and I was just all about it, and so is Lisa, right?
Yeah, and another cool thing that we get to do is we get to help our kids, our grandkids, in their endeavors. So if there's ever any way we can jump in and help, we want to, and we do. We've got time to do that.
Right.
Can I just say, though, I think you did it really well because you retired and you knew that there was more within you, but you did give yourself the freedom to just enjoy life for a little bit,
Yeah.
right?
We did.
It wasn't this frantic
Yeah,
kind of
like-
like, I have to find what's next.
Yeah, right. I mean,
Right.
we had 3 or 4 months off. It was great.
No, we actually enjoyed the time off.
Yeah.
And I think it's key, like, good to know too, that you're still an active part of SLS. Like, you're still advising and,
Yeah,
and a part
still
of
on the board.
Still on the board of SLS, so you're still an active part in that, advising Angelica and Ryan in the next steps and what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they have, in fact, taken it to the next level.
Oh, yeah. They've grown
It's-
about 25%.
It's growing like crazy. I mean, what
What's-
a great legacy.
One of the beautiful things about legacy, I think if you do it right and you've got a great team and infrastructure that you put together, they get to stand on your shoulders and build from there. They don't have to start over. Starting anew is really hard.
Yeah.
We understand that with our new Discover
do.
Strength
The
franchise.
new venture.
It's
Yep.
really difficult. We met today on how to grow it. And it's very, very painful, very difficult. They're standing on our shoulders and they're building from there. And it's great. It's wonderful to watch that. Your business is like your baby. You give birth to it. You feed it. You give it your energy. You give it your money. You put everything you've got into it, your blood, your sweat, your tears into it. Especially when your legacy is to pass it on to family or friends that you actually chose to.
Yeah.
That was your design, which this was my design, my preference, rather than to put it on the market. It was to pass it on to my team that I raised up. And so I was able to offer them special financing so that we could make this deal happen. I was well compensated. I get to watch my kids, so to speak, because the whole team, they feel like my kids.
Yeah.
I get to see them go out there and beat what I did. And my prayer is that they're going to double or triple what I was ever able to do. And it's looking like they probably will.
Yeah.
And it's
I love
beautiful
it.
because it's third generation now,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
This is Grandma Virginia's legacy that you
Yes.
carried on, and now Angelica is, and that's really, really beautiful.
Yeah.
This has been gold. Like, we could continue to talk, because even as you're talking of all these things coming up, but we're
Oh.
at time
It's
for
so
this
fun.
session, isn't it? It's awesome.
Yeah.
And so, well, hey, Bill and Lisa, thank you for being with us today. Allie, as always, so glad to have you, obviously. Weight Coaching, thanks for joining us today. Be sure to like,
Yeah.
subscribe, share.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear your feedback as well, so be sure to comment as well. So, hey, Thank you. Have a wonderful day.